بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, I want to continue in our discussion on the importance of Al Madhaahib. And we should get some idea of what is needed, some idea, not a lot of details, but some idea of what is needed for someone to be in a position to not have to follow a madhab, right? So the default position for us is that we have to follow a school of thought. Okay. As ordinary Muslims learning, we're not learned enough to deduce legal rulings from the primary Islamic sources ourselves. So the question becomes, what are some of those qualifications to put one in a position of deducing legal rulings from the primary sources? So let's get our juices flowing together. We mentioned the primary sources as a review. Tell me, what are the primary sources of Islamic law? So we say deducing from the primary sources. What are those primary sources that we talked about? The main primary sources for Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Good, Sufyan. Quran, Sunnah, and you should say Ijma', then Qiyas, right? So these are the primary sources. Now, when we look at those primary sources, from those sources, we can get an idea of what someone needs to know. So for all of us, most of us here can disqualify ourselves for simply one reason related to those sources. What would that obvious reason be for most of us? It's an obvious one if we thought about it. That's why I said we gotta get our juices flowing, thinking cap. For most of us, what is the obvious reason to tell us we're not qualified? Besides, a lack of knowledge of what? And Fatima, I don't agree with you have a lack of knowledge. I think you're very knowledgeable. You just don't have the requisite knowledge. It's not a lack of knowledge. It's the requisite knowledge. So what requisite knowledge is obvious you're going to need to deduce anything from those sources that most of us lack? Bingo. Most of us, not everybody, but most of us here don't know Arabic well enough. So we disqualify automatically, right? Arabic language, problem, right? Because all of those sources, Al-Quran, As-Sunnah, meaning the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Al-Ijma' and Al-Qiyas, all of those are going to require Arabic language. It's a must. And to be excellent in Arabic language, not just to know Arabic. Even knowing Arabic is not enough. You need to be excellent in the Arabic language. So if you want by way of comparison, most of us don't know English well, though we all speak English. And if you listen to me every day, you know I don't know English. Do we have a consensus on that? Oh my goodness. Sometimes I have fun with myself, right? So that gives us a way because you can speak English, because you can convey meanings, because you can understand, don't mean you know English, right? So I can have a whole conversation in English. And I can exchange ideas, I can talk, I can give lectures, but I don't know English. Not well. I know enough to get by. But if really asking me about English grammar and English, no, doesn't work. If I took an English test, I'd probably fail with flying colors, right? However, the point gets across. So when I'm saying Arabic, I mean you can't be like us in English. In the Arabic language, you can't be the equivalent. You have to be much more skilled just in Arabic. So from one side of it, we're all wiped out, right? And mostly all the Arabs are wiped out, right? Because their Arabic is worse than our English. So so don't feel so like intimidated by that, right? Our level of literacy in English is far higher than in Arabic for the people. So that's from one side of it. So that's an obvious one. So for all of us, that means because of that lack of strength in the Arabic language, we're going to necessarily have to follow someone who is stronger than us to even understand what is being extracted from, right? So that's one side. And this is important so we could be in realization. So we would understand that at one point, one of our jobs is going to be to develop an environment where the next generation is stronger in the Arabic language till we reach the point of excellence in the Arabic language. Even if we never get there. Like I said all the time when I'm talking, stop thinking about yourself. You may not be there, but provide the means of access to future generations. Listen, at this point, we're no longer thinking about ourselves. I think we have that already, right? Do we? That we realize by now with all these classes, this is not just about us. Did we get that point? I hope I conveyed that adequately to everyone. This ain't just about you. But you are extremely important in what we have to do. You're extremely important. So you have to start the process, right? You have to start the process. So that's one aspect. All right, we got past that. So most of us disqualified. Fine, we got that. All right, what about the person who's excellent in Arabic? Right, he has that. Now for the Quran, there are certain things he's going to need to know. Among them, first of all, he has to know in the Quran which verses relate to rulings and which do not. Because not every verse of the Quran relates to legal rulings, and it's not a source of legal rulings, right? So he has to know which verses relate to legal rulings. That's one aspect of it. Independently, he has to know this stuff. And he has to know which verses are general in their application or specific in their application. So not as a verse of a ruling, is it general in its application? It applies to everything? Or is it specific? Is it an absolute verse or is it restricted by other things? Right? Is the verse itself clear or does it require further explanation? There are different types of Quranic verses related to rulings. Also, he has to know, is the verse abrogated or abrogating? Because not every legal verse in the Quran, its judgment still stands. Some verses are abrogated. There is such thing as abrogation, meaning it used to be the rule, but it's not the rule now. Right? He needs to know that. So we're just talking about type of verses of the Quran, for instance. Right? He should know which verse can only bear one meaning and which verse bears multiple meanings. So that's important. He has to know that stuff. Because if he doesn't know this about the Quran, what can happen? If he doesn't know this about the Quran, what can happen? Give me some idea. Help me out here. Hmm? We're together. Come on, let's think together. Bad rulings. He may not make a good legal ruling. Mm-hmm. Tell you. He wouldn't be referencing the Quran. Mr. About What the Pittsburgh, them Pittsburgh people, that's all they think about is Wahhabis. I don't know nothing else, but I do know about a Wahhabi. Right now, it's Pittsburgh people. Go ahead, Imam Genius. You laying your thing down. Tell you. Okay. So all of those things are possibilities. Exactly. Now let's move to as-sunnah. We're talking about the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is he going to need? And this is by way of examples. It's much more, right? If you go into books of the sciences of the Quran, you'll see how much more he needs to know. And in time, inshallah, we'll talk about more details. But we just given by way of idea, so you can get some of a concept in your mind, and it's easier for you to do what's necessary once you understand, like follow a madhab, right? So from the side of al-hadith, which is more important, which is much more work than the Quran. Why? Because the hadith literature is far more. So first, he have to have a comprehensive knowledge of the available narrations and books of hadith. Let's think real quick. How many source books do we have translated in English that we know? Source books. So we have the 6 books. I know that. Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. We have the Muwatta of Imam Malik translated. We have some of the Musnad of Imam Ahmad translated. And I think that's it. Right? I think that's it. Am I missing any source book that's in English? That's the only books I know that have been translated in English. Did I miss anything? Someone might know. That's the Muwatta. It's the same thing. Whether both Muwattas. And there's more than those riwayat, those narrations. Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi and Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. There's the Muwatta. Anything else? So we're missing a lot, right? We named like 20 different source books, and we only got like 7 in English. So just the amount of access is limited to us, right? Right? So that's not going to work. So that's one aspect. Just access, right? So that's one aspect. That's a big aspect because you don't even have access to the necessary material you need to do deducing, right? To deduce legal rulings, you don't even have the books that's necessary to do it available to you without Arabic language, right? So with that, so that's one issue. Then you need to know which hadith are for legal rulings. So now with the Quran, you got like 6,600 and something verses, right? Well, you got hundreds of thousands of hadith. And you have to know which one is for legal rulings and which one is not. I have to know all that. And here, let me explain something to you about hadith, which is very important. The hadith is of two parts, a chain and a text, right? A chain and a text. And hadith are counted by the chain, not the text. Hadith is counted by the chain, not the text. Why is this important? Because sometimes, quite often, you have a text that is transmitted by many different chains, and sometimes the narration from different chains will have an impact on how the hadith is understood. That's very important. This is one of the biggest errors of false claimants to hadith when they're trying to judge the authenticity of a hadith. Not having adequate knowledge of the different routes by which that hadith have reached us. That's very important. The multiple chains of transmission on how a certain text has reached us. It's very important. And the impact of one narration on another. So you have to know that the person who's going to deduce legal rulings has to know that. So he may have one hadith with one chain and not realize there's another hadith with another chain that has some wording that impacts that hadith. But he's not aware of that one. He's only aware of this one. So his ruling is going to be wrong. Do y'all understand that? And there are whole books written just on this subject with multiple examples, entire volumes written just on this subject. Imam al-Tahawi, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the one who we read about his book Aqidah Tahawiyah, he has works just in this subject alone. He was a hadith master. Okay, that's one aspect of it. Then he's going to have to know how to distinguish a rigorously authenticated hadith from a sound hadith, from a weak hadith, from a fabricated hadith. Right? So you got the highest level, a rigorously authenticated hadith. The next level, a sound hadith. The next level, a weak hadith. And then what is not a hadith but exists is fabricated hadith, right? He's going to have to know how to determine between all those things. And what are the factors that contribute to us deciding which one is which, right? And to do that work, he needs mastery of the narrators of hadith and their strengths and their characteristics and their reputations of all the narrators. He needs to know that, because a great portion of determining the authenticity of the hadith is based on the narrators of the hadith. So he needs that knowledge. Right? Especially when he's making rulings. Right? So that's a whole field of study. right? He also has to know how to reconcile apparent contradictions in narrations, where one hadith seems to apparently contradict another hadith, and how to resolve that. Got to have that kind of knowledge. Because one hadith will say this, and another one will say this, and it seems to contradict each other. What you do? And why? And how? He needs to have that knowledge, right? We're talking about just hadith. And many, many more other things that I didn't mention. Likewise, abrogating and abrogating hadith. He needs to know that too. So that's hadith. Then the third thing we talked about is al-ijma, consensus. What is obvious when we say he must know about consensus? What else he must know? Which should be obvious. If we have a consensus, what is obvious that needs to be known in relation to this subject? Something's obvious. Think about it. Something that's obvious. If we say there's a such thing as ijma, which is scholarly consensus, what's obvious thing you have to know? Come on, let's think. Some things is obvious, not qiyas. In order for there to be a consensus, right, the opposite must exist, right? Wouldn't that be obvious? If there's consensus, then the opposite of consensus must exist, right? And what would be the opposite of a consensus? What would be the opposite of consensus? Hmm? Dissension? Not. Find a better word, Shaquille. Discourse? Find a better word, Shaquille. There you go, Samira. I know them Pittsburgh people, they would come up with an answer. Difference of opinion. If we have a consensus, then the opposite of that, opposed to that, would be different, would be a difference of opinion, right? Something that's disagreed upon. We don't have a consensus on it. So that person who's going to know when there's consensus has to also know what issues are what? Issues of difference of opinion. And this is a big problem, right? Many people, they talk as if what their opinion is scholarly consensus because they don't know which issues there is scholarly difference upon. So they'll give you a legal ruling as if my ruling, everyone must follow it. How do you know that? Right? This happens a lot. You ever hear somebody come tell you, that's haram, Mark? According to whom? And the way they say it, as if there's scholarly consensus on this thing being unlawful. And oftentimes, especially when we're talking about legal rulings, this thing is subject of disagreement among the scholars. But that person just don't know it. Because he's emulating someone whom he thinks is a mujtahid scholar who's not. We had a discussion yesterday. We were studying. It was funny. I'm not going to go into details about the discussion, but we was talking about people being strict in following the rules. So we was talking about a particular ruling and how some people are very strict in the ruling according to a school. And I said to our brothers, I said, they're not really that strict. They're not even following the stronger opinion in the school, the most uh, religiously safe position in the school, not even according to the books of the school. And then I showed them what the strong, religiously precautious opinion is in the school. That those people who criticize other for falling short are falling short in the school itself. And the point that we were making was, don't just rush all the time acting like something is a issue of consensus or like we're the best thing since sliced bread when it comes to legal rulings, which is not the case. So this is an important, it's for us. This is a very important thing for us to understand. When something's a consensus and when something is a difference of opinion among the scholars. Why? Because when there's a disagreement among the scholars, that opens up facility for common people in an issue, right? So when someone presents something to us, even if they don't say it, but the way they present it, as if it's an issue of consensus, it puts difficulty on someone who may not be able to meet that. And it blocks their access to religious dispensation, which is a mistake. If it's ijma, it's ijma. You cannot go against it. But if there is legitimate scholarly disagreement, you have room. And who should take that room from you? I'll give you an example as Americans. A lot of Americans have an attachment or an affection to dogs. Some people like dogs, right? Within the schools of thought, the rulings related to dogs vary. They're not all the same, right? They're not all the same. For a Shafi'i, a dog is problematic, big time. For a Maliki, the dog is not as problematic as a Shafi'i, just to give you an example, right? So as a Shafi'i, the way I'm going to deal with a dog is not the same way the Maliki is going to deal with a dog, right? Just an example, right? And other issues. How to deal in non-Muslim lands, right? For the Hanafi, it's going to be different from the Shafi'i, right? They're going to have some rulings that the Shafi'is don't have, right? They're going to have ways of doing things, buying and selling. In the Shafi'i school is rough. In the Maliki school, it may be easier, right? There is different rules, and every madhab has that. and combining and shortening the prayers in our work environments may be rough. In the Hanbali school, there is room, right? So knowledge of the vastness of the sacred law will produce facility in times of difficulty. But if everyone thinks everything's a consensus, then you have a problem on your hands. You have a problem, right? You make the deen almost impossible for sometimes. And that's not the deen is impossible, it's just you don't know it, right? And you don't know the vastness of the sacred law. So I guess tomorrow we'll finish. We'll run out of time. So inshallah, we'll stop there. And remember this all of what I'm saying is just making you aware of some things as we eventually grow. This is a marathon. It's not a 40-yard dash, right? Right. So the intent here is not to be specific on every single issue. It's to give you a general view so you can understand where we need to be and then actually do it, right? And then actually doing it, right? So all this to show you, hey, you're not qualified not to follow a school of thought. Now go follow a school of thought, right? Normally we just teach you a school of thought, but in the environment we live in, I don't follow a madhab, I follow Quran and Sunnah. So you have to teach the person that's delusion. You don't have the ability to follow Quran and Sunnah on your own, right? So we got to go to step one to bring you back to step. We got to go to step two to bring you back to step one, right? Some of us think we can fly and we haven't even learned how to crawl, right? And that's important that we realize where we stand so we can begin to make the change, right? Mm. Yes, you can pray with a dog in the house. Now you're going to ask me all the details, why and how, right? Now I'm messing with you, Aisha. Yes, you can pray with a dog in the house, but you need to ensure that that dog doesn't get its moist parts on you or the place you're praying on, where you're praying. So that's another thing. Now, is that a recommended thing to do? No. But is it valid? Yes. So it's levels to it. Is that a recommended thing to do? No. Is it valid? Yes. But if you're a Shafi'i or a Hanafi, I don't know about the Hanbali. I do know about the Maliki. The Maliki, not that much problem. For the Hanafi or Shafi'i, oof, problem. If that dog touches you with its moist part, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Yeah, that's my point. Hardship, unnecessary. You don't have to pray outside. Tell you, this is not fatwa class. Give me a fatwa. I'm not a mufti. So what is easy to do is go learn fiqh. Go learn a madhab. Sit with someone, to a teacher, and learn a madhab. You don't learn rulings like this, because most of those rulings are not real anyway. Because when you said, does the dog need to be a watchdog? Example. Is that an issue of consensus? No. Right? It's not an issue of consensus. So therefore, that means there's difference of opinion. Then you need to go, right? So it's easier, just follow one school and learn the rules, all of them, not pick and choose. Learn the rules according to one school. And then if you're confronted with an issue that's problematic, you learn about other schools. Do you follow? That's my suggestion. So don't open up sessions of religious judgments which entail details that you don't even have time to go over the details. Remember I was talking about researchers? Remember I was talking about like 5 people, just their research, right? I want us to get to that point, right? Because a lot of things you think you know, you don't know. I'm talking about us. A lot of things we think we know, we really don't know. We haven't even studied enough to know. And I'm talking about all of us. There's a lot of things about this deen you think you know, you don't know at all. But we start off with a bad premise, is that we don't realize that not knowing is not always a bad thing. Because if you really realize you don't know, you'll always seek to learn. The problem is when you think you know, you stop learning, right? So if you just get this concept, seriously, I never, like, just myself, someone tell me something, oh, that's the rule. Okay. I don't never always automatically say to myself, that is the rule. I don't listen to that at all. Okay, that is the rule as you know it. And my first thing is to say, when I want to know it, I'm not necessarily going to question the person. I may listen, but I want to know what school that came from, right? And I want to actually make sure that that's the rule in the school, period. And then if I'm having some issue with it, I want to know other schools too, right? Eventually. Because within a school, sometimes that's not even the rule, as people may say it. Within the own school they're talking about. There's learning, inshallah. We'll talk about that more in detail. Barakallahu bikum, I gotta go. The timekeeper has told me to get out. May Allah reward you. Barakallahu bikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.